Old Testament reading today is from Psalms 37:23. The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Lord, your word has been put forth. Let us consider what you have for us and ponder it this day. So as many of you know, we recently went to Tanzania, which is how they pronounce it here, or there, we pronounce it Tanzania here. And we hiked Kilimanjaro. It's almost an indescribable experience. Thus, Nancy and Marcy thought we should describe it. So here we are, doing a sermon about it. We want to start with some background, some logistics of our trip, and then share just a few of the incredibly special God moments that we experienced along the way.
There she is. So that's Mount Kilimanjaro. But what do we know about it, and why the heck did we decide to hike to the top of it? Well, first of all, Kilimanjaro, as many of you might know, is the highest mountain in Africa. It's known as the roof of Africa. It's actually a dormant volcano formed over millions and millions of years. It is technically approximately 19,341 feet tall. And it's one of the 7 summits, or the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents. So, now by comparison, Mount Everest is taller at over 29,000 feet. However, from base to summit, Kilimanjaro is actually the highest freestanding mountain in the world, since it's not surrounded by mountains. It's the most prominent above the landscape. But compared to the other 7 summits, hiking Mount Kilimanjaro requires no special mountaineering skills. It's basically a gradual hike, and anyone in any decent physical condition can do it. Now, the most difficult part of climbing Kili is that at high altitude, the atmosphere gets thinner, and you breathe in less than half of the level of oxygen than you do at sea level. So to counteract this, you need to ascend very slowly and allow your body time to acclimatize to the lower oxygen levels. If you ascend too quickly, it can lead to acute mountain sickness or altitude sickness. So symptoms of AMS, altitude sickness, include headaches, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, confusion, slurred speech, and in the worst cases can lead to death.
But we're here.
We're here, so we avoided that. We did take medication to help with this, called Diamox, by the way. Now, we chose a trek that lasted 9 days total, 7 days to the summit and 2 days for the descent, just to give you that 7 days slowly to get your way up the mountain. And because the body needs time to acclimatize, we usually hike very slowly, which was tough for me since I'm used to hiking much faster every year when I hike the Appalachian Trail. So it was tough for me at first to go at that pace, you know. I had to trust in that. And the guides are constantly telling the group, pole pole, which means slowly, slowly in Swahili. You heard that over and over, pole pole. We're going pole. So, now, the original idea for this actually came from Nancy about 8 years ago, I think it was, who had the idea to hike it as a fundraiser. And some of you may have been here. We actually started the initial planning for that, but honestly, life got in the way and it was kind of put on the back burner. But the seed was planted for me, and I knew that someday I would get there. But Christina, on the other hand,
had no interest. The plan was for him to hike it and me to meet him at the end. And the reason I was excited to meet him at the end is because then we would go on a safari. A safari in Africa was the very first thing I put on my bucket list when I was 23 years old, sitting at a desk at the bank that I worked at on the corner of Orange and Washington. I wanted to do a safari in Africa and do a hot air balloon ride. So that's how we both wound up getting to the concept of going to Africa. So let's talk about our group of hikers. There were 11 of us. We had 2 married couples, 1 mother, son. We had 5 singles, and mostly ages 40 to 58, with a very athletic 18-year-old thrown in there.
I was the old guy, by the way.
And wise, older, wiser, right? And there were 4 of us from Florida, 4 from Boston, who were constantly cold, and then several from a variety of other states along the way. You spend all of your time during this hike with all these 11 people. So you really begin to form relationships and strong bonds. You hike together, you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. There's tea time together. And just in general, if you're not in your tent, you're with this group of people. So you start to become a little community, which means making decisions. So as an example, there's 2 bathroom tents that get set up by your porters every day. And after a day or so, we realized that the seats were often wet. So we quickly decided that the women were always right and the men should be left out. So the women used the right bathroom and the men used the left bathroom, and the seats were no longer wet in the women's bathroom. So you see, decisions for the community, good for everyone, right? About halfway into our hike, we came up with a team name, actually suggested by one of our guides, Team Ushindi, Swahili, and it means winners and champions, USHINDI. It helped us to continue to create that unity and a mindset of being able to finish and do the hike all the way to the top. It encouraged us, just this team name. And this really resonated with me and Joe particularly, because in our family, we have a saying that we can do hard things and that we are winners. This is our team of 11 in the dining tent one night.
So now the 11 of us didn't do this on our own, far from it. Yes, hikers on Kilimanjaro are required to hire local porters and guides to help carry equipment, set up camps, cook, and just generally serve us in many ways. These are very good jobs in Tanzania, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. So we had a total of 50 porters and 5 guides with us for our 11 people. So it's a 5-to-1 ratio, which just blew my mind. But when you see everything they do and all the equipment, they basically set up a city, like a tent city one day, tear it down, run ahead of you, with tents on their heads on the trail, and set it up at your next camp. It's amazing. We're so thankful for them. So, and the company we chose, Thompson Safaris, no endorsement, but just they have a reputation for paying a very fair wage and treating their porters very well. So that was important to us. And hiking Kilimanjaro has been described as walking from the desert to the Arctic. We passed through 5 climate zones, starting at the base of the mountain in hot, humid conditions, passing through the rainforest, and above the tree line through heath and moorlands. And at the summit, you end up in Arctic conditions with snow and glaciers and freezing temperatures. In some parts, it feels like you're walking on the surface of the moon or Mars, like that picture there. I've never been to the moon or Mars, but imagine that's what it looks like. In others, you walk over loose slate that sounds like glass. That was pretty bizarre. And then you'll go over a ridge, and all of a sudden it opens up. It becomes lush with waterfalls and crazy-looking trees that look like something from a Dr. Seuss book. So we experience the beauty of God and His creation in the varying terrain, and not to mention the weather, which can change every 5 minutes or so, it seems. So we'd start off cold, hiking with many layers, then the sun would come out, you get hot, you take layers off, then the clouds come back over, and you're freezing cold again. So it's a constant battle.
So the porters that we told you a little bit about already, they just do such an incredible job caring for us every day, day in, day out, for so many wants and needs and things we didn't even know we'd have on the mountain. So for example, in the mornings, after they wakey us, they would bring us coffee and tea and hot water to our tents to help us wake up. The chefs prepared 3 meals a day, and the waiters served them. And there was a team that even set up traditional tea time, because it used to be an English colony, every day back in camp around 4 o'clock or so. So every day they'd find fresh water. Now keep in mind, it's not fresh water for 11 of us, it's fresh water for all of us and all of them. So a total of about 70 people. And sometimes they'd even have to backpack back to another campsite miles away to get the water for the day. A little over into the hike, they actually do a total resupply, which means a group of them have to go down the mountain and all the way back up in a day with a full new bags and so forth of supplies. So you can imagine the weight of this on their shoulders. Often at the end of our hiking day, the porters who had broken down our tents, carried all of our stuff to the next camp, set up the camp for us so it was all prepared when we got in for our hike, would do all of that and then continue their trek to come get us, and so that they would support us for as much as a mile back to our tent, and they would take our day packs from us. But most importantly for us, I think, is they walked back with you. So you had a larger group coming into camp. They were really encouraging you that last half a mile to a mile. Many of them didn't speak English, but there were a lot of good jobs, a lot of fist bumps and high fives, and just the biggest smiles you ever want to see, welcoming you back to camp and encouraging you to finish that last half mile to a mile. Here's the hard part for us. Once we got back to camp, your porters that set up your tent really care for you. So we would collapse into our tents at the end of the day. They'd unlace our boots, take them off our feet, and then they clean them for us. The porters cared for us in ways that we are not accustomed to and generally don't experience. And it was hard for us to accept it a lot of the times. So I can only imagine how the disciples felt when Jesus washed their feet. To us, they were constantly showing us love and the tenderness of Jesus. And these
Back to the other slide there.
are our two porters, Nevadas and Shedrick. And they were so smily all the time. We loved it.
And then that next photo you had gone to already just kind of gives an example of the porters. They would be carrying their own stuff, plus maybe a jug of water, plus a tent or a pack or something on their heads. And we would be hiking along and they would just come flying by. You would hear somebody say, "Porter, porter, porter on the ride," and you just move over and they just go flying by because they're getting ahead to set up camp at the next spot. So it was incredible. But as a side story, one of the hardest parts of the whole journey was that you're in a tent. You don't shower for like 9 days, and I know that was hard for Christina, but even for me, I'd never been in a tent for 9 days. I hike usually 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, but and you don't sleep much either. Due to the amount of water we were drinking and the altitude and the medication we were taking, it means you have to go to the bathroom a lot. So you're getting up several times in the middle of the night. So I think if we slept more than an hour at a time, that was a wonderful thing. But it's freezing temperatures at night every night. There's many nights we woke up and there's ice on the tent. It was just beautiful. You come out and shine your light on it, and it's like crystals all over the tent. It was amazing. But what happened too is the zippers would freeze shut, so it was kind of hard to get out of your tents. You got to, you have to do your thing, and you get stuck in there. And even once we had to rescue our fellow hiker Maggie as we're getting up to go, and we said, "Maggie, do you need help?" She said, "Yes, help me! I can't get out of my tent." So we let her out, and it was all good. It's teamwork. So now on the hike for the first several days, you always see the summit of Kilimanjaro in the distance. Now, Kilimanjaro itself is a huge national park. Parts of it, you go up and then it's flat for a while, and then the summit is there. So you always see that summit in the distance, but it feels like a long way off. But as you start getting closer, the last day or two before the summit day, it starts getting real. And that's when I started feeling a little bit of worry and anxiety about how we might be affected by the altitude. I wasn't worried about the physical difficulty of the hike, but I was worried that we might get altitude sickness and not be able to reach the summit. So I've been praying to myself, and we prayed together a little bit, but really, like one of the last nights before summit day, I really felt that we just needed to get together and openly, publicly pray and ask God to take away the fear and to give us strength. So God led me to lead a prayer time after dinner, and praying in front of people is not something I'm normally comfortable with, even here. I don't know if you can tell I'm nervous, but I know I'm not alone in that. But after dinner, I raised my hand and let everyone know that we would be having a time of prayer, and everyone is welcome to stay. About half of the hikers stayed, and 5 of us, including some who weren't obviously Christian. You couldn't, you can kind of tell, or depending on what they say, but they stayed. And others that left, asked us to pray for them on the way out. And all 5 of our guides stayed also. And by the way, one of those is a pastor himself, PJ, or Peter Joseph, good biblical name. So I started off with a prayer much like we do here. I prayed, God, we trust in you. We know that we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. We give our fears and anxiety to you. And for me, that just was a real, it's powerful to just hand that over and say, look, I'm worried, but I trust you in this, and I'm going to hand this off to you. And after that, I can't say I didn't have any worry, but really just felt a renewed sense of peace, I think, after that. And we offered that anyone else who wanted to pray could do so also.
And when we offered that, our guides prayed, and two of them prayed in Swahili. And hearing them praying in their native tongue, of course, we couldn't understand what they were saying, but we could tell from just their spirit and their inflection and the power with which that they prayed. It was incredibly special and moving for us. And then one of our guides, Philomena, our only female guide, she prayed in English. And she had such beautiful words and a beautiful way of speaking. She's so honoring of the land. It's so personal to them, the land of the area, and they talk about it all the time. Their knowledge, actually, of all the plants and how the various plants live at different altitudes or with the resources that the plants have, the guides know all of that. It's so cool how in tune they are to their land. And so it was really incredible for me just to hear our guides praying, one in Swahili and then Philomena in English, and then another one in Swahili. And it really just bridged all of us together as community in the prayer. It was really special. So now on summit day, we get up at 3:30 in the morning, and we started hiking after a nice warm breakfast and hot tea or coffee at 5:30, or 4:30, sorry. And along the way, we got to see the sunrise.
So that was taken probably about, 17,000 feet or so when the sun finally started coming up. Our camp is at 15,000 feet. So as you're hiking, again, you're going very poly, just very slowly. It's literally like step, step, step. At this point, I was okay with this pace, believe me, because going from 15,000 feet elevation at base camp up to 19,341, that's a lot of elevation gain, especially when the air gets really thinner and thinner and thinner. So you really have to trust your guide and follow in the footsteps, literally. And that the picture there, this is our head guide, MC. It's also went by Muna and some other names they called him, but MC. He said, when we get to the summit, I'll tell you what MC stands for. And he said it was Mountain Cheetah. And I'm not sure I believe him. I told that to one of the other guides, and like, oh, that doesn't sound right. But I'm going to go with Mountain Cheetah. So MC was just, he's the captain of the ship, basically, of all the porters and guides, all the chefs. He leads everything. So what you have to eat, the medication you take, the pace you go at, what time you should get up, he sets everything. So now, again, we're worried about, can we make it? On the way up the mountain, we actually saw several people that were being assisted down the mountain in distress, and they had not reached the summit, being not carried, but somebody, a person on each side under their arm, just basically half carrying them down. It's like, ooh, this is a little sketchy. So I'm like, okay, poly, I'm good with poly. So, and as you continue to ascend, they tell you that about 18,000 feet is where it really starts to affect a lot of people. And the guides are all around us. There's five of them. We have one at the front, one at the back, guides on the side. So they're just surrounding you. And they are watching to see how everybody's going. And as it started getting tough, I'd say about 18,000 feet, they came alongside us and started singing these songs that it was amazing. And the songs included, they would go through and name each of us by name. I'm terrible with it. But it was just so encouraging and motivating to do that. It takes your mind off of the pain. And your mind's, by the way, also already sort of getting a little foggy, I think I was getting a little bit of a headache. Thankfully not too bad, but that, for me, that was so powerful when they came along and just would start singing to us.
So as Joe said, once you hit about, it depends, it's a little different for everyone, 17,005 or so was when I could start telling that my mind wasn't as sharp as it should be, or it normally is. I often had a practice of counting my steps. I would count to 100, then I'd start counting again as something to do because we were going so poly. And probably at about 17,500 on that day, I was having trouble counting to 100 and would miscount or count another number again. So I had this awareness that my mind was going. And the guides and the porters, you actually have more hiking with you that day because they know that additional people might need help. I was the last female to give up my pack. They'll carry it for you when they see that you start to have some struggles, and Joe never gave up his pack.
My dead body.
And so one of the really just so blessed experiences that I had is about this time that my mind started to go, I was praying, and Joe and I did a prayer out loud from Trace Diaz, a meditation prayer. And I started praying to God. And what he told me was something I hadn't heard before. He said, your body, she is good to you. She's gotten you through childbirth, and she's gotten you through their hard hikes. She's gotten you through a marathon, and she has been so good to you. And I received that. I think as women, oftentimes we don't think of our bodies in that way, in all of the ways that they bless us. And so when that kind of came over me and washed over me, I had the recognition also that my mind was going. So I really leaned into the prayer and asked God to align my body and how good she was to me with my mind and bring them together, and that I might be able to finish the hike and reach the summit on that day. So it was an incredible moment of clarity for me, what God had provided for me, both my physical self and my mental self.
And so, like I said, Kilimanjaro is basically a dormant volcano. And so the first milestone that you reach, the steepest part of the hike is from base camp up to the rim of the crater. And this point that you reach there, just under 19,000 feet, I think, or so, is called Stella Point. So we get to Stella Point, then the view opens up over the other side. You can see into the crater. We took a little break, but you're still not at the summit. You still have about a mile and a half hike around the rim of the crater, up another 500 feet or so, to the summit itself. The highest point is called Uhuru Peak, Uhuru. So the whole way, you can see here at this point, we're in the snow. You can, not in this picture, but off to the side, you see the glaciers in the distance. We thought about, we could have gone down and touched the glaciers, but by this point, I was too tired. That wasn't happening. And as a side note, by the way, the glaciers have been shrinking substantially over the past 50 years, and probably won't be there in another 50 years. So I'm glad we got to see them at least.
So when you reach the summit, it is so emotional. You all, and I don't know that we expected it, everyone cried. Everyone in our group, and several of the guides as well. We supported one another, we hugged one another, we made sure that everybody got just the right picture that they wanted of one another, but really the emotions of it were so impactful for us. Of our group of 11, we had 2 that fell behind on summit day. The guides, they were ready for that. Instead of trying to stay with the group, the guides encouraged them to hike their own hike and to believe in themselves. And with the guides staying, one guide and an extra porter at least stayed with each of the hikers who fell behind, and they were in lockstep with them and encouraging them along the way. I'm glad to say that both of them were able to finish and reach the summit, and they took a slightly different route back to us at the camp that was more steep downhill, but they had the guide support so that they could get back to a lower altitude quicker and feel better faster. So the 2 that fell behind on hiking day, I have to say, I was actually so humbled by their stick-to-itiveness and by their belief that they could do it, because they didn't get to stay with the group and have some of that camaraderie, but they really leaned into what their guide said. So it was really humbling to see just how hard they were working to finish, and it was really special.
So you see that picture, if you count, that's only 9 people. The other 2 came up, they were about an hour later. As we started going down, that's when we passed first one and then the other. But all in all, we were 11 for 11, 100% success rate, which is kind of unheard of. Because the average success rate is, if you read, is about 65% of people who try to reach the summit actually succeed in that. So the lesson for me was that by trusting, following our guide, he knew what was best for us, and we were able to get there. And obviously, the analogy, it's God is our ultimate guide, right? So he gives us a lot of advice. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to follow that path. We want to go at a faster pace. We want to go in a different direction. We want to do different things. But if you listen to that gentle voice, just doesn't lead you astray. So, and as a side note too, these pictures, this is a picture of us, just Christina and I, obviously with Flat Jesus. Maybe some of you may remember Flat Jesus from a few years ago. We took Flat Jesus to the summit of Kilimanjaro. So there he is. And we didn't get a picture, but when you're there, obviously you have a 360-degree view of everything. It was incredible. And as you can see, we had a beautiful sunny day. It was relatively warm at the summit. It was probably still below freezing, but there wasn't a lot of wind. The sun was out, so it was incredibly beautiful. But even though you can see 360, we were well above the clouds, thousands and thousands of feet above the cloud level. So when you look down, all you saw were clouds. And Maggie, our fellow hiker, just kind of described it as looking like being in heaven. So it was amazing. So after the summit, we spent about an hour there, and then it's the hike down. We camped that night, and then the hike down to the base again took two days. And once we finished, we had an incredible lunch together at the bottom of Kili. Very celebratory atmosphere, marking our crazy journey. And we broke bread together one last time for lunch, and some of us with a Diet Coke, an iced tea, or another beverage, possibly. So.
So we finished our time in Africa with what was on my bucket list, which was a 4-day safari. And almost all of that time was spent in a Land Rover. That is an incredibly sturdy vehicle because it is an incredibly bumpy ride. So the next picture will show what was on my bucket list, which was a balloon ride over the African safari, where we again had to trust our guide. A balloon pilot, let's be clear, is putting fire into a garbage bag and floating you amongst a variety of different landscapes, right? And we trusted our pilot, our guide, so much that he brought us to land among a pride of lions. There were about 4 of them within a football field of where we landed. For me, this was my bucket list item. This was the day before my 50th birthday. We saw the sunrise while we were up in the balloon, which was so beautiful. What was really touching for me, different than being in the Land Rover, was being above all of God's creatures in their space and seeing it from up top. We saw a group of giraffes. There were about 14 of them. There were 4 or 5 babies, and they were just so beautiful. There was a time where the sound of the balloon spooked some elephants, and so the herd started running. And again, that was just so gorgeous to see. And at the end of our hot air balloon ride, we actually had lunch in the Serengeti. And for me, being able to put my feet on the ground, because again, all of our time for that had been spent in the Land Rover, but putting my feet on the ground in the Serengeti amongst God's creatures in their space was so moving and impactful in a way that, again, it's hard to describe. It's beyond beautiful. It's reverent is probably the word that I would use. So to be able to walk where they were walking and have that lunch there was really special. So what I think, as Joe indicated, this experience really helped me to see was a very real and practical trusting of the guide. Our guides were physical. We could see them, we could touch them, we could talk to them, and we could have a conversation with them. So trusting someone who's done this, and MC had done it 250 times. He's done this hike. So being able to trust him is one thing, but we have our God in heaven who we can't see. And yet, there were so many experiences during the course of our time in Africa that it's so obvious there's a good God who loves us and who we can trust and who can help us do hard things, help us see beautiful sights, and everything in between, including his people. So we'd like to finish our time by showing you a little video of all of those who cared for us along the way. So if you've ever seen Lion King, Hakuna Matata means no worries, and they use that language, obviously, and they actually made reference in this song to Kilimanjaro as well. So they take the songs and they'll adapt them to the people that they're with or to the place that they're in. And so in the Serengeti, they had something that they would sing that was a little bit similar to that.
And one last note, the guy in the tiger suit or whatever that is, he was our head waiter, basically. He's the one that brought us food every day. And he had this thing, you had to wash your hands if you wanted the dining tent. So you knew it was time for to eat any meal, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, you'd be in your tent or whatever you heard, washy, washy! You had to be there, but it was amazing. We really started to appreciate that. So, all right. So, dear Father, we just love you and thank you again. And thank you for giving us this time here, for being with us as we share a little bit of this journey. And help us to see you in all of the things we do and know that we can do hard things. In Jesus' name, amen.